are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on our latest webinar regarding the Engineering and Manufacturing T-Level, regarding the Employer Set project for Design and Development Pathway. I'm Sam Ashman, Technical Advisor for Engineering, and today you are joined by Alison Whittle, who's looking after the platform today. Next slide. So using the platform today, please send any questions through the webinar chat part. You are set to mute, and at the end of the webinar, you will be... So as I said, I'm Sam Ashman, Technical Advisor for Engineering Manufacturing, who's leading on the Engineering Manufacturing T-Level, and I'm also joined by Alison Whittle today, who will be going through a deep dive into the Employer Set project, and she's our Technical Advisor for our Post 16. As it was always, the engineering manufacturing team consists of our industry manager, Robert Stott, who's predominantly working with T-levels and employers, and also our level 3 reforms, and also Scott Wilkins, our industry manager, looking after the entire portfolio. As it's an EAL City and Girls collaboration, we've also got Jazz, who's our T-level support at our EAL centre as well. Next slide, please. So the agenda today, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the core assessment. So regarding the Employer Set project, the assessment windows and the timing and evidence required for each task, what's being assessed, the assessment objectives, and again, at the end, any questions, answers that you want to ask us via our question section. Today, it's just going to be the overview of the core assessment, required the evidence for the Employer Set project and what we're looking for. And in this webinar, we will not be talking about the occupational specialisms, progression, industry placement, reviewing the content, and the core theory examinations. These are done at separate webinars. Over to you, Ali.
Hi, thank you. There is a slight lag here, so apologies, everybody. So as Sam said, this is going to be a deep dive into the ESP, the Employer Set project. So I've tried to approach this from your perspective and start with some common questions that I would want to know the answers to, and to make sure that what is being covered in today's webinar is obviously, so things like, will there be any additional support for uploading of evidence? Yes, there is a guide for the ESP, which we put a link below. When will you get the ESP? So it's that project on March the 6th, and it will be via your T-level portal, and you will be notified in advance of how you can access this. All 4 tasks are going to be released to you at the same time, and that's really to help you plan your assessment and your curriculum planning. And you can see again, there's a link there to all the key data schedules on there. The Employer Set project is administered task by task to learners during the assessment window. So that opens on the 13th of March and it closes, which means all evidence must be submitted to us at the very latest on the 31st of March. Can learners retake, resit the ESP, and if so, when? Yes, there are 3 opportunities. There is an opportunity for a resit or a retake in the autumn series, which runs from the 6th of November to the 24th of November 2023. And also learners do get a 3rd attempt, which will be the following summer series, which will be 2024. How is the ESP marked and graded? So the good news is that it's all provided by us and all marked by us. So the only thing centres have to do is to provide us with the evidence, which we are going to tell you exactly what we require from you then. Just a quick point there, please do put Q&A, any Q&A into the chat, because we will try and answer these as we go along. But the whole idea of this webinar is that you'll have an idea of what's going to be answered as we go along. Please do read all the assessment documentations ahead of delivering this, because there's a huge amount of resources available to support you. So all of these questions are going to be answered in this webinar presentation. In other words, how is the ESP structured? What do learners have to do? What do you need to provide to City and Guilds? How long do learners have to complete the ESP? What are our responsibilities, with these tasks? How do we keep the assessment evidence secure until we upload it? And a real deep dive into what each task consists of. So just to give you some sort of idea, this is what we're going to be focusing on during it. So you've all will have seen this before, but I'm just going to sort of give a very high level overview for in case we do have any people joining us who are not in delivery, because this is predominantly for in delivery centres. But you know, for the core assessments, learners must complete 2 externally set and externally marked exams, which cover the knowledge, the mandatory knowledge from the core assessments. So I'm going to be looking at the ESP part only today, which is for the design and development pathway. So just to clarify, the ESP for the design and development pathway is 18.5 hours long in total. It has 4 timed tasks and the mark allocation is out of 90. And it's weighted at 30% of the overall core assessments. So all, as I said, all core assessments are set by us and marked by us, so to relieve the burden of marking an assessment on centres. So these are your key dates. We've just been able to add the autumn dates for you as well. So the dates for you, as I said before, the materials are released to you a week in advance, all together to help you plan. 6th of March, you can start your delivery between the 13th to the 31st of March. We have to have the evidence uploaded by the 31st. Exam paper 1 will start on the 6th of June. It is a dated entry exam, which it has to be taken at that time, along just the same as A-levels and GCSEs. And exam paper 2 follows a week later on the 13th of June. We've got extra information there for, you know, special considerations. If we look at the autumn series, some centres may choose not to sit in the summer and may choose, because of the length or time of the guided learning hours within the core, that they may choose to have their first sitting of exams in the autumn series and the ESP. But please bear in mind that these cannot be split for the very first time. They all have to be taken together. You can't split it up at this moment. So the autumn series there, you get the materials, which will be obviously a different brief from the summer series, on the 30th of October. Then you can start releasing, delivering that, or learners start to start the assessment window from the 6th of November to the 24th. We need that evidence by the 24th, enable us to get the results to you. Exam paper 1 starts on the 28th of November, followed by a week later exam paper 2. So I've just given you some ideas. As Sam said, you will be getting these slides. So in this next section, I'm going to be going into the detail of how the employer set project is laid out, really, and what evidence is required. So first of all, you know, the employer set project is a classroom-based assessment, and that's undertaken in controlled conditions, not vigilated. So it is tutor, you know, you will be in the room as this happens. It's prescribed within the candidate and the centre guidance packs if you do require any more information on that. But your learners will probably be more familiar with the term a controlled assessment rather than sort of controlled conditions. It takes the form of a realistic brief to be achieved through completion of 4 tasks, all of which are classroom-based tasks and include a presentation. What is key is that the ESP, Employer Set Project, is not about the skills of an engineer. It's the knowledge, theories and concepts of a problem and how to pull a plan together. So in teaching, we would probably refer to this as metacognition, which means, simply put, thinking about one's thinking, or more precisely, it refers to the sort of processes that are used to plan, monitor and assess their understanding and performance. What is key is the number of tasks will stay the same each year. So there'll always be 4 tasks, and they will always be a research task, a design task, a planning task and a presentation task. So that will not change. What will change is that new brief will be set each series, which will cover different topics. But that brief will only ever draw from the core mandatory knowledge. It won't look at any of the occupational specialisms. So a little bit more information here. The employer set project really for design and development is linked to the set of core skills, and Sam's very kindly put them on page 16 in the specification. She's indicated where they are. So core skill A for design and development is planning and preparation. Core skill B is communication. Core skill C is developing proposals and concepts, and core skill D is evaluation. So this project samples knowledge across the core, as we said, and of course the occupational knowledge and skills for each of the 13 specialisms I think engineering and manufacturing has, they're going to be assessed in the practical assignments known as the occupational specialisms, and they are not in the core. But what is different to previous qualifications is learners are going to be marked on the accuracy of their work, and that includes maths, English and digital skills. So this is a really high level overview here. So and we're going to unpick all of this later. So this particular slide looks at the set project and the 4 tasks and how that time is split up and what type of evidence that we require. What's key is that these tasks must be released in order of sequence. So learners cannot or must not complete any task out of order. For example, they can't do task 3 before task 2. Now, if I was a teacher listening to this presentation now, my first question would be, what if somebody's off sick the day that we deliver task 2 and they're not there? So then they have to, obviously, they go back and sit that task. So their sequence is in order, not yours. So just to answer that question quite early on. I think what is key as well, you can see the marks that are allocated to each of the tasks. And these marks have been based on the weighting and level of skill that's required for the task, not the time allocated to the task. So really, the message here is don't make the mistake of assuming time equals quality or quantity of marks. And of course, 10%, or in this case, because there's 90 marks in total, 9 of those marks are going to be allocated to maths, English and digital skills, which we will show you where they're likely to be across the project. Again, this won't change. Every year, this will be exactly the same. The only thing that is going to change is the brief for those research, design, plan and presentation tasks. So you can see here it's a summary, and I'm just going to move on to how they're assessed. So if you quickly look at those conditions, they're all under controlled assessment, supervised controlled, they're not invigilated. So that just means that, you know, you are in the room, it is a controlled, it is timed. In the case of some of those there that you can see 8 hours, you know, straight away as a teacher, I'd be thinking, how am I going to deliver that? So we're going to show you how you can break that down into different sessions as long providing they're consecutive. So I'm going to move on quickly now to the scheduling window here. So, you know, I'm not going to sort of look at this for too long because you will have got the key dates there for you. So it just breaks those tasks down. What is key is on the left-hand side of this slide. And of course, this is all about the 5 assessment objectives that you can see on that table on the right. And this provides an explanation of each assessment objective. Now, straight away, you can see assessment objective AO2 has the highest weighting, which is 50%. Now, that's an off-qual requirement because off-qual, who have set all of the assessment objectives, have said that 50% of the marks for the ESP must be weighted on application of knowledge and skills. Now, these assessment objectives and weightings for the ESP are going to become much clearer when we start to unpick how those marks are allocated against each of those assessment objectives and what is being assessed in each task, and just as importantly, what is not being assessed in each task, so you don't waste time on something that's not being taken into consideration with the examination and the marking there. Just a quick one going, just to make sure I've really been clear on this. You're not allowed to release any materials to candidates until that assessment has formally begun, because it is a controlled assessment and it can't be taken at different times. It all has to be within that classroom at that time. So this is a real sort of shows you how each of those assessments can down. So the idea of this is, for each of the 4 tasks, I'll go into detail for you to help you support learners to understand what they're being assessed in for each of those tasks. And you can see straight away that those 5 assessment objectives I showed you in the previous slide have been broken down in some cases into parts A, B and C in some cases. The reason for that is this is to help markers interpret the assessment objectives correctly. So you can see straight away AO1, so if you keep those assessments in mind, plan their approach to meeting the brief. AO2, which is the highest weighting, which we said before was 50%. We've got AO2A, which is about application of knowledge, core knowledge, and then we have AO2B, which is about application of core skills. And you can see where we're looking at what those core skills are, because we referred to those core skills earlier on in the presentation. AO3, did they select the relevant techniques and resources to meet the brief? And there you can see we've got AO4, which is the use of maths, English and digital skills. So where you see AO4A, maths are going to be assessed within that. AO4B is English and AO4C is digital. And finally, you've got AO5, which is realise the project outcome. And it's about reviewing the outcome, really. Did the outcome meet the brief? And we've got AO5A, was the right outcome achieved? And of course, AO5B, review how well the outcome meets the brief. So you've got those really drilling down into detail. And Sam's very kindly put your ESP sample marking grid as a link for you on those slides, so you can see those in more detail. So this table here, it looks a little bit full on when you first see it, but it's basically just showing you how the 90 marks for that employer set project are distributed against each of the tasks. So these are the assessment objectives that I've just referred to in my previous slide. And you can see how they've been mapped against each task. And it shows you the total marks for each of those tasks. So for instance, in task 1, there is no AO5A or AO5B being assessed. But you can see there's a lot of weighting on AO2A and AO2B, which is application of core knowledge and core skills right the way throughout the ESP. And you can see AO4A, AO4B and AO4C is taken throughout the project, where there are 9 marks, 10% in total, for your digital, mathematics and English skills. Again, there's another link to this one. So I'm going to start now with task 1, which is your research task. So I'm just going to sort of let you digest the information on the screen there. So under each of these headings, I've put an explanation really of what each task heading means. And you can obviously refer to the overall centre guidance. So they've got to do a research task, and that involves planning, core knowledge, selecting techniques and resources, and a research task is all about the logical investigation into and the study of materials and sources in order to establish facts and reach new conclusions. So the learners will have an overall brief, which they must keep with them for each task, so they can keep referring to that brief. As we said, there are going to be 4 tasks in overall. So they will have 3 hours to carry out some research that you'll see stated based on that brief, and they will make notes. Usually they'll have around 3 sides of A4, which is typically about 1,500 words, providing they're using single spacing and sort of font size 12. So it just gives you an idea of the amount of notes that we need. They must keep their notes and include the sources that they have used on the internet. So in other words, if they've researched something, they must give reference to that particular website as to where they found this information. So you can see here which of those assessment objectives this task is being marked against. So in this case, those 15 marks are derived from AO1A, which is 3 marks for planning their approach, AO2A, 3 marks for applying the knowledge to the content of the project, 6 marks to application of skills, AO2B, and 3 marks for did they select the relevant techniques and resources meeting that brief. So what do we require? We require a technical brief, which is typically 1,500 words. We want the hard copy. You must keep a hard copy of this and save it securely. So one thing that we have to insist on is that once that assessment is over, that evidence is collected, and though you keep that securely. Now that could either be on a file, it could be on a pen drive, it could be in a locked cupboard, but you can either scan or PDF that document to give it back to the students for reference, providing they don't rework it. So I'm going to suggest here, I'm going to give some hints and tips on this for you. So once they've done their research, they're going to have, about 1,500 words. They must copy and paste those websites used. Just to go back, they are going to be marked on the accuracy, and a lot of learners in the past have obviously copied and pasted information. Can I just suggest that you make sure that they put them all in the same font sizes, because examiners picked up that it was an obvious cut and paste and it didn't look very tidy. So if you can just make sure the research notes are all in the same font sizes, and they just cut and paste the websites and give reference to them as they go along. They don't have to do a bibliography. There's as long as they've referenced those. So they will have access to the internet to conduct the research, and they must, as I say, keep a record of those. So that's where task 1. So hopefully that's given you plenty of information. So all we require is a technical brief that must have those lists, research notes, and a list of references within that typical brief research that they have resourced their information from. Moving on to task 2, which is going to be a design task. And that means it's a planned approach. They have to select techniques, realise an outcome, and review an outcome. There is 8 hours in total to complete this task, and it has one of the most marks, which is 24 marks in total. So there's an awful lot of information on this slide. So I'm going to pause for a moment here to let you read it. So I'm going to unpick this now for you. As I say, there's a lot of information. So first of all, this 8 hours to complete this task, it can be split over consecutive sessions. It can be, I think, we will have a look at this in the guidance, but a lot of do 4 and 4, but they must be consecutive there. So these marks, really high marks, you can see where those marks are allocated against. Again, 3 marks for their planning of their approach to meet the brief, 12 marks in total for their application of knowledge and skills, 3 marks for selecting the relevant techniques and resources. In this case, it's going to be sort of the CAD, AO5A and AO5B, which is did they realise the project outcome and have they reviewed the project outcome. So just to give more information here, what do we require for this task? So what we want from you, we want drawings as evidence. Now they can be annotated sketches and CAD drawings, and they will be typically 4 A3 size drawings. There will be supporting calculations for those, and that will typically be 2 sides of A4. And we require notes detailing how the design meets the brief requirements. And just to give you an idea of a word count, typically about 500 words. We also require from that learner a declaration of authenticity to make sure that those learners have completed that work. So in order for the learners to do this, you should be giving them back the research notes from task 1. And as I mentioned, they must be in a PDF format or scanned, so learners cannot rework them, and you keep the original copies. So you can see there's some additional information here, which is task specific and considerations. They do not have access to the internet for this task. We've mentioned they can be over consecutive sessions. Candidates must be reminded that their drawing submissions should include both the initial sketches and the fully realised designs. If that 8-hour session is broken into 2, you must retain those candidates' work and hold it securely between those sessions. So moving on to task 3, which is a plan. So in this task, learners will have 5 hours to complete the task, and it carries 18 marks. Those 18 marks are allocated against assessment objectives AO1 planning, their approach AO2A and AO2B. You can see highly weighted again, 12 marks between both of those. AO3 selecting the right relevant techniques and resources to meet their brief, and nothing on AO5A or B. We require a programme of work plan. Now that can be presented in an industry recognised format of the candidate's choice, and that would be typically 1 side of A4. And we also require a supporting statement, and we ask that reporting statement will have typically about 1,000 words, which is approximately 2 sides of A4 side of paper, providing they're using single spacing and no bigger than a font size 12. Additional task-specific requirements and considerations. There is no access to the internet either for this particular task, and candidates can have access to copies of their responses to the previous tasks, but this must be for review purposes only and should be in a PDF format, or where it's a drawing, you can give them a scanned copy back rather than the original copy back. So looking at the very last task here, which is sort of a lot of detail again. So I'm going to unpick this further for you because, as I say, there's a huge amount of information on this slide. So learners will have only 2.5 hours to complete this task. It is a presentation task, and that means they have to plan their approach. It's conveying information from a speaker to the audience. They have 24 marks allocated in total across all the assessment objectives for this task. And if we bring in the additional marks for accuracy, you can imagine that digital will be highly marked, and as well as English within this task, because obviously there's going to be a presentation which we recommend should be done as a digital sort of by digital medium. So marks here, I'm not going to read them out, you've probably got used to them all by now, right across all the assessment objectives. So equally apart from AO2A and AO2B. Now this task has the highest marks apart from the design project as well. So just be aware that lots of marks are are achievable from this. So to approach this task, learners should be given 2 hours to prepare their presentation, and that must be presented in a digital format, for example, PowerPoint. After those 2 hours, they will have 30 minutes to deliver their presentation, and within that 30 minutes, they must answer 3 questions following their presentation that relate to the content that they have presented. Now, what we require as evidence is we want those presentation materials, the slides or any handouts, for example. It must be videoed and recorded on a microphone as well. So we need everything. We need them to just see what they're doing. It's the whole video recording of the presentation there. We're going to show you what format as well that we need that in. And we also require some observation evidence. Now that observation evidence is going to be, you will be given a candidate observation form where you will note the 3 questions and their responses for it, and any notes that you want to provide alongside that. So on this task, I'm going to share some valuable tips really. So lessons learned type thing from other waves of T-levels. Make sure that the learner speaks clearly into the microphone, because we've had some cases where it's illegible and we can't hear the learner, it's muffled. So please make sure that that microphone is clearly next to that learner. Advise the learner to have bullet points on the slides and make sure they don't just read from that slide, because obviously that's the evidence they're being marked against, is their presentation skills. Also, make sure that that candidate has been clearly identified, because we've had cases where we haven't actually known who that evidence relates to. So they can either do that by wearing a name badge or having the name and candidate number visible on the presentation. So just some hints and tips for you there. Again, if you have a large cohort, you may only want to have a maximum of 6 presentations, in any time, which is, when you look at it, it's 3 hours of presentations in one day. So you may want to break those up. In this case, tutors must make a note of the questions asked and the responses given. I would seriously recommend you test the recording material before and afterwards to make sure it can be clearly heard. And if you can get this, some support from another member of staff to support you in this, it does make life a lot easier, because you're not trying to run the presentation, ask the questions and get the evidence as well at the same time. So it's just about making sure that you have everything you need for this. Another massive hint and tip: the earlier you can start introducing presentation skills in small groups or micro teaching, the easier it's going to be for those learners to develop these skills. This was where the most marks are, and it's where learners don't do particularly well if they've not been used to presentation skills for many years now, because of the situation we found ourselves in with COVID. So you've got everything you need on that slide. So presentation, video, observation evidence, and the 3 questions that you must ask the candidates will be provided by City and Guilds around the types of questions you need to ask, but obviously the nature of the questions should relate to the content of their presentation. So this is some additional information regarding the presentation here. So the presentation has got to be presented individually. It's not a group presentation. I've said before, I'd recommend more than 1 member of staff to support or listen to it. And I think given within the presentation, obviously, if there is no additional candidates, I would present in front of other candidates if it was me, to make sure that you've got an audience there. At least 1 qualified member of staff has to assume the role of the audience, and they will need to ask those 3 questions contextualized to the presentation. And of course, again, we said, please note the questions asked and the candidates' responses just as backup as well. And it's good practice to do this, providing, we don't always capture all the information correctly within the video. So it also gives a second backup. And I said before, please do make sure that your visual, your sound's being captured, your equipment's working. Don't leave that to chance, because things can go wrong. So almost pausing, almost coming to the end of mine. So the next 3 slides really, I'm showing you the marking grid for task 1 and each of those AOs. And why we've done this is because once you can see how it's marked, it gives you an idea of what the examiner is looking for and how those marks are allocated, how those 15 or 24 marks are 15 in task 1 are allocated across. So this is part 1 of another slide. So on this slide, you can see the different band descriptors and how they're relating to the 15 marks. I know it's got 9 on there, but there's further marks on the next one, and how they relate to, and the indicative content relating to those marks. So you can see AO1, AO2A and AO3. Moving on to the next slide. This is a continuation, as I said, and here's a breakdown of the AOs and the marking descriptors that examiners are going to be looking for. So this is all about the marking descriptors, and it's the same for all versions. So a band 1, a band 2 and a band 3. Again, we've put a link there to the sample marking grid, so you can look in that in more detail. So looking at low marks for this, you can see some evidence of a planned approach within AO1. And if we move across to band descriptor 2, you can show its wording alters to consistency. So planning and consistency. To get the higher bands where most of the marks are, what they're saying is that there's clear evidence of methodical and thorough approach to research and information gathering as well. So just so you can have a look at those at your leisure. And this final slide here on this one is a breakdown of AO2B, which is the application of skills, and that's showing the indicative content and the marking descriptors, which is continued from the last slide. So you can see the sort of 15 marks are made up from these. The indicative content here, you can see what the examiner's looking for and where the marking descriptors are. What is that examiner looking for? So is it basic? Is it consistent? Or is it comprehensive? So just to give you some idea how it's marked. So I keep mentioning about security and controlling assessments. For those of you that may not have had to do this before, I've put down here some links for JCQ guidelines and a really helpful video just to sort of show you what you need to do for the administration and support required for security of those not exam papers particularly, but the tasks and the assessments. So basically you must keep all of those evidence in between those tasks secure. Those candidates cannot rework evidence once it's been submitted and the end of the assessment timing is over. And as I say, you may decide, you can store it in lock cupboards, memory sticks, as long as it's collected at the end of every session. So this is really a high-level overview of how the overall core grade is generated. So, I mean, it's a difficult one because it's quite unique to this because it's been set out by the Institute. So the raw marks, which are the actual marks from each of the 2 theory papers. So we have exam paper 1, exam paper 2. The raw marks are then converted using a uniform mark scale before any grade boundaries are set. The ESP is then converted to a uniform mark scale before the grade boundaries are set. And those UMS marks for the core exam and the ESP are then aggregated to produce a final UMS score, which provides an overall A star to E grade or A star to U grade, or for the core component. So for each ESP, each candidate will get their raw mark, their UMS mark and their ESP assessment grade, which will be A star to U, as well as getting the overall core component grade. So moving on, this is my final slide, I think you'll be glad to hear. So to summarise, and I've put all of that into one slide. This is the evidence you will need from your learners to upload for mark into City and Guilds on those key dates that we've said, which is this year is the 31st of March. Little hint, please don't leave it till the last week because systems can crash. You know, I would use 4 days before really and have everything done then, just to allow for learners being off. You don't want to be uploading everybody's work on the final day. It will take so much time. So you know there, for task 1, there's the evidence we require, a brief research notes that include a list of references. Design 2, we want your drawings. We want 4 A3 size drawings. We want 2 sides of A4 supporting calculations, and we want 500 words minimum on how those notes detail how that design meets the brief requirements. For the plan, we want 1 side of A4 work, and we want a supporting statement, 1,000 words. And for the presentation skill, we want those materials. We want the slides, we want any handouts, we want that recorded, we want an observation record of what took place and those questions. So that, I'm sure you've heard enough of me by now. So I'm going to hand back to Sam, who's going to take you through the final part of the webinar. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Ellie, for that. That's much appreciated. Some of those links that we identify, such as the ESP guidance and the key date schedules for design and development, all in the chat. So please do download those. As the ESP is linked to the core skills that we identified right at the beginning of the presentation, so the core skills A, B, C, and D, you can see these. You can see these in the specific. Please for accessing on the employer set project. Next slide, please. So as always, so such as these, please. And again, just a bit of regarding that supporting how we're helping you. You've got the resource hub, and again, that is where that information regarding the employee set project and the key date schedule are all identified, as well as the specifications. You've got myself as your dedicated technical advisor for the engineering and manufacturing T-level. And also we've got those employee industry boards and provider focus groups. So again, everything to support you while you're on this journey. Next slide, please. So as previously said, the events and webinar, this afternoon we are doing the employee set project for MIR. Just to give you an overview on that, we will be going through the slides, which is very similar to design and development. It will be only the tasks that are different to design and development webinar, and exactly the same for MPC. So if you're signed up for both webinars, just be wary that you'll be seeing this information again. It will be only the task evidence that we're asking for. Again, with that face-to-face network, if you want to come and see us direct and ask any questions, it is during when the employee set project brief is released to centres. However, it's a good opportunity to network with centres and also ask us any questions. And those on the Tuesday, the 7th of March in London, and also Wakefield on the 8th of March as well. Next slide, please. As always, like to share website support providers. And again, we've had that on T-level Thursday. We also had that information regarding additional funding, increasing regarding capital funding as well, and also that supported replacement. So do check on those websites. And again, throughout our T-level development, on our next slide, we have got the employee set, the T-level core textbook. This is through Hodder Education and not through City and Guilds. So again, this is being put to June 2023, but I do recommend you get in touch with Hodder Education and reserve your advanced sample chapter and copy. And these are on, you can do it for like looking at it first before it's released into public. So do get in touch with Gemma at Hodder Education. And last of all, as always, if you'd like to get involved with City and Guilds, especially when looking at how the employee set project is put together, the marking, moderating examinations, etc., we do have a variety of different association roles available, such as your principal moderator roles, principal examiners and marking examiners across the T-level. So again, if you need any further information, then do get in touch with us. Next slide, please. So I'd like to say a big thank you for attending this session this morning. We've had some great information and chat coming through. One of them I might be able to ask you, Ali, to help us on this one, on that chat question. You might have already seen it previously on the other waves. in King's College, and he wants to know, is there an alternative learners who refuse to be recorded due to send?
Sorry, is there an alternative to a video recording? I missed the last bit. I'm sorry, Sam.
For learners who refuse to be recorded due to send.
I mean, you can actually apply for special considerations, and if they don't want to be recorded, as long as they are clearly identifiable, they can submit. It doesn't have to be in digital format. They can do a presentation, but that then means the onus will be on the tutor to submit all of that evidence, the observation records. So if that is sent, there will be special considerations that I think we've already put on our website that you would need to submit to City and Guilds prior to that to make sure that that was taken into and that was negotiated with, just as we would with any special negotiation, with any special considerations.
Thank you, Hallie, and Paul says thank you for that clarification as well. Paul's also put in the questions. Can the 18.5 hours take place at any time throughout the window? So not quite. So if that's the case, yes, it is that you can, as long as it's case within the window. But if you're separating a task, that must be consecutive. So for one of the tasks where it's 8 hours, that has to be a consecutive day. But no, it can take place any time, providing that task is finished. You can't, if you've not completed a task, that has to be consecutive. Sorry, does that sound a bit garbled? Sorry, Paul. That was what I was trying to say, because some of them are quite long, so you wouldn't do it all in a day. Yeah, that's fine, Ali. And then the other one is, can we upload after?
Really is no. What has to be happened is all of that candidate's evidence has to be so anybody else. Yes, you can. The reason we can't have tasks uploaded as soon as they've been finished is because then it takes the onus on the examiner to put all those 4 tasks together, which, as you can imagine, when they're dealing with thousands of people, so we want one file per candidate with all 4 tasks within that file and clearly identified. Otherwise there's a risk of that tasks not being matched up to the correct person. So sorry, that isn't possible at the moment.
Thank you. And then one for me, does the design drawings have to be in CAD? And I've just CAD drawings. It will be specified in that task. So I do recommend that you look at the 730. Any other questions on this one?
Can we just have any chat? Has this been helpful to you? Because this is really in what we are allowed to share for that's released. And of course, we don't own the qualification, as you're aware of it. It is owned by the Institute, and we have to be really sort of careful of that we're not leading or disadvantaging some centres over others. So has this been helpful, and has it given you a really good indication of what you need to do once you get that brief? Because that's what this has been all about, really.
Yeah, we've got feedback from that full. Yes, very useful. Does it mean that the upload facility has changed?
That's still the same. I think it's going to be in your T-level portal. Am I right, Sam? Yeah. I know there's a separate department for that. Can we take that back, Nancy, just to check? Because my understanding of last week was that the examiners wanted all those tasks uploaded for that learner once they were completed. If that has changed, have we got Nancy's contact details so we can, or everyone's contact details so we can let them know if they can upload task by task? Because my understanding is they can't.
Yeah, we've got Nancy's details. We've got the Nancy's.
That's great, thank you. We'll clarify that for you if that's okay.
Stephen Clash has put, is the 6 the option? No, it's as long as you do it in consecutives. So because it's an 8-hour, 3-hour, and a 2-hour. So it's how you want to organise it. As long as it's done across those, that's how you want to do that one. And also, you will also get the recording after this session, customer events team as well, which will have your CPD certificate on as well. Paul's put, I would like to see some examples of students' work. Ali, one for you. Right.
Yeah, it certainly is. There are no examples of students' work, as you know, it's in its model answer, and we're not allowed to because we don't have the rights of the qualification. However, all the scripts will be released to you after those learners complete their first ESP. So you will have an idea of what marks and grades that there are. What we can't do is provide that model answer. What we can do in the next webinar, once those scripts have been, we can look at examiners' comments, and we can take some scripts once we've anonymized it and make sure they're anonymous, and we can show some examples of real students' work once that work has been completed. Obviously, we have to make sure that that learner can't be identified. So yes, the first after the first series, you will get those scripts and those marks back.
That was great. Thank you for that feedback, Ellie.
Can get some time back. There's a huge amount of information, so but I don't make any apologies for that, because we just want to support you in the best way that we can. So hopefully it'll take time to digest, and you may come back with us with some further questions, which we'll do our very best to answer.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to close the webinar now. If there are no further questions, if I open my chat button, obviously I'm going to share it with everybody, which I shouldn't have done. So I'll let you end the webinar, Sam, and